When David opened that old photo album, his hands trembled. Half the pictures were gone, torn out, burned at the edges. And beside the empty space where his wife's face used to be, he found a note in his sister's handwriting. "You should have seen this coming." That was the day everything collapsed. Family, trust, and the illusion that love alone could hold a broken home together. The rain hammered against the cracked pavement as David Okoro ran through the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd seen the small figure dart behind the house, heard the clattering of metal bins being overturned. His 8-year-old son shouldn't be outside at this hour, shouldn't be digging through trash in the pouring rain like some desperate scavenger. When David rounded the corner, his breath caught in his throat. There was Toby, knees deep in garbage, his small hands trembling as they clutched something precious. Tears mixed with rain on the boy's face as he looked up at his father. And in that moment, David saw something that shattered him completely. Toby was holding a torn photograph, its edges stained and wrinkled, but the image was unmistakable. Miriam's smile, frozen in time, stared back at them both. "She's gone, Dad," Toby whispered, his voice breaking. "But I can't let her disappear." David dropped to his knees in the rain, pulling his son into his arms. The photograph had been thrown away earlier that day. Angela had been cleaning again, reorganizing, making space for what she called their new life. She hadn't meant any harm, David knew that. But standing there in the rain, holding his weeping child, he wondered if any of them truly understood what they were doing. The house felt different when they walked back inside. Angela stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of concern and something else David couldn't quite name. Guilt, perhaps. Or maybe it was the exhaustion of trying to fit into a space that wasn't made for her. "Is he all right?" she asked softly, reaching out to touch Toby's shoulder. The boy flinched away, clutching the wet photograph against his chest. He didn't say anything, just walked past her and up the stairs, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood floor that Miriam had once polished every Sunday morning. "David, we need to talk about this," Angela said, her voice strained. "He can't keep living in the past. It's been 2 years. He's 8 years old, Angela. His mother died. You don't just get over that because a calendar says it's time. I'm not asking him to get over it. I'm asking you to help him move forward. Help us all move forward." David looked at her then, really looked at her. Angela Nwaffer was beautiful, kind, patient in ways he'd never expected to find again after Miriam. She'd entered their lives like a gentle breeze, offering comfort when the storm of grief had seemed endless. But standing there, with his son's sobs echoing from upstairs, David realized that comfort and healing weren't the same thing. The following morning arrived with the kind of brightness that felt almost cruel. Sunlight streamed through windows that Angela had recently stripped of Miriam's favorite yellow curtains, replacing them with modern white blinds that let in more light, but somehow made the rooms feel colder. David found Toby at the kitchen table, not eating the breakfast Angela had prepared, but drawing instead. The boy's drawings had always been his way of speaking when words failed him. David picked up one of the papers scattered across the table. It showed a house, simple and square, with 3 stick figures inside. One was tall, one medium, one small. But the medium figure was colored gray, almost transparent, while the other 2 were drawn in bold, dark lines. "That's beautiful, Toby," David said, sitting down beside him. Toby didn't look up. "Mama's fading," he said simply. "Every day, she fades a little more." "No, son, she's not fading. She's just... Her pictures are gone. Her flowers are gone. Her chair is gone." Angela moved it to the garage. Toby's pencil moved across the paper in quick, angry strokes now. "Soon there won't be anything left." David felt the words like physical blows. He'd noticed the changes, of course. The house had been gradually transforming over the past 6 months since Angela had moved in. Small changes at first. A new throw pillow here, different dish soap there. But lately, the changes had accelerated. Miriam's painted accent wall in the living room had been covered with neutral beige. The flower pots she'd loved had been replaced with modern succulents. Even the kitchen, where Miriam had spent countless hours teaching Toby how to make her famous chin-chin, now bore no trace of her presence. "I'll talk to her," David promised. though he wasn't sure what he would say. Don't bother. Toby finally looked up, and the resignation in his young eyes broke David's heart. She wants Mama gone. She wants to pretend we never had her. Before David could respond, Angela appeared in the doorway, her face tight with hurt. She'd obviously heard at least part of the conversation. That's not fair, Toby, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I'm not trying to erase your mother. I'm trying to build a life with your father with you. But everywhere I turn, I'm reminded that I'm not her, that I'll never be her. Do you know how that feels? Toby gathered his drawings and stood up. Do you know how it feels to watch your mama disappear? He asked quietly, then walked out of the room. The silence that followed was suffocating. David stood between two people he cared about, feeling torn in directions he couldn't reconcile. Angela's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, straightening her shoulders. I'm trying, David. I really am. But I can't compete with a ghost. No one's asking you to compete. Aren't they? She gestured around the kitchen. Every day, I feel like I'm auditioning for a role in a play where the lead actress is still getting standing ovations. Your mother looks at me like I'm an intruder. Toby barely speaks to me. And you? She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. You still say her name in your sleep. David didn't know how to respond to that. The truth was complicated, messy, impossible to explain in words that wouldn't cause more pain. He'd loved Miriam with every fiber of his being. Losing her had nearly destroyed him. Angela had helped him remember how to smile again, how to imagine a future beyond grief. But somewhere in that journey, he'd failed to see that healing for him meant something entirely different for his son. The days that followed were marked by a tense silence that settled over the house like dust. David threw himself into work, spending longer hours at his architecture firm, designing buildings while the foundation of his own home crumbled beneath him. Toby retreated further into himself, his drawings growing darker, more abstract. And Angela tried harder, perhaps too hard, to create a sense of normalcy that felt increasingly forced. That's when Kelechi started coming around more often. Kel, as everyone called him, had been David's best friend since their university days. He'd been there when David met Miriam, had been the best man at their wedding, had held David up at her funeral when grief had literally brought him to his knees. He was family in every way that mattered, which is why David didn't think twice when Kel started dropping by several times a week. Just checking in on my brother, Kel would say, his charming smile easy and familiar. Making sure you're holding up. He'd help Angela with household repairs that David never seemed to have time for. He'd bring wine and tell stories that made Angela laugh, really laugh, in a way David hadn't heard in weeks. Kel had a way of filling spaces, of making people feel seen and understood. It's what had made him such a good friend for so many years. But Toby noticed things that David, in his exhaustion and distraction, missed. The boy watched from corners and doorways as Kel's hand would linger on Angela's shoulder a moment too long. He saw the way Angela's face would light up when she heard Kel's car in the driveway, the way she'd check her appearance in the mirror before answering the door. He noticed the late-night phone calls Angela would take in the garden, speaking in low tones that carried on the evening breeze. Toby drew what he saw, pictures of a man and woman holding hands while another man's back was turned. Images of smiling faces hiding behind sad ones. Sketches of houses with cracks running through their foundations. One evening, when Mama Ruth came to visit, she found Toby on the front porch, drawing by the fading light. "What are you making, my dear?" she asked, settling her considerable frame into the chair beside him. Toby showed her the picture without speaking. It was more detailed than his usual work. 3 adults stood in a triangle. 2 were close together, their hands almost touching. The third stood apart, surrounded by dark scribbles. Mama Ruth studied the drawing for a long moment, her expression growing serious. "Toby, do you want to tell Grandma what this means?" "It means lies," Toby said simply. "It means the house is breaking, but Dad can't see it because he's too sad about Mama." The old woman's face creased with concern. She'd lived too long, seen too much, to dismiss a child's intuition. Children often saw truths that adults spent enormous energy avoiding. "Has someone been unkind to you, child?" "No, Grandma." but someone is being unkind to Dad. He just doesn't know it yet. That night, after Toby had gone to bed, Mama Ruth confronted her son in the kitchen. David was sitting at the table with a glass of whiskey. He wasn't drinking, staring at architectural plans he wasn't seeing. David, we need to talk about what's happening in this house. Mga, imtirid. Can we do this another time? No, we cannot. She sat down across from him with the kind of authority only mothers possess. That child upstairs is crying out for help, and you're too buried in your own pain to hear him. I know Toby's struggling. I'm trying to help him adjust. Adjust to what? To watching his mother be erased? To watching his father be betrayed? David's head snapped up. What are you talking about? I'm talking about keeping your eyes open, son. I'm talking about being present in your own life. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm talking about your friend Kel being here too often, being too familiar with Angela. Kel is helping us. You've been a good friend. Has he? Mama Ruth's eyes were sad but firm. Or has he been a good friend to himself? You're seeing things that aren't there. Am I? Or are you refusing to see things that are? She stood up, placing a weathered hand on his shoulder. I'm not saying this to hurt you, David. God knows you've been hurt enough. But that woman is lonely, and lonely people make poor choices. And your friend, the one you trust like a brother, I've seen the way he looks at her. I've seen the way she looks at him. You're wrong, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. I hope I am, son. I truly hope I am. She moved toward the door, then turned back. But whether I'm right or wrong about that, I'm not wrong about this. You can't build a new life by pretending the old one never existed. And you can't help your son heal if you haven't healed yourself. After she left, David sat in the darkness, his mother's words circling his mind like birds of prey. He wanted to dismiss them, to write them off as the overprotective concerns of a mother who'd never fully approved of anyone replacing Miriam. But something nagged at him, a whisper of doubt he couldn't quite silence. He found himself thinking about all the times Kel had been there lately. The easy laughter between him and Angela. The way she'd seemed more animated, more alive after Kel's visits. The phone calls she'd taken private. No, he was being paranoid, letting grief and exhaustion turn him into someone suspicious and small. Kel was his brother in all but blood. Angela was trying to build a life with him. They deserved his trust, not his suspicion. But upstairs, Toby lay awake in his bed, clutching the photograph of his mother that he'd rescued from the trash. And in the darkness of his room, surrounded by drawings that told stories no one was listening to, the boy made a decision. If the adults wouldn't see the truth, he would show them. He would make them see. The next day was Saturday, and Angela had planned a family outing to the beach. It was the kind of perfect day that felt designed for making memories, with cloudless skies and a warm breeze that smelled of salt and promise. But Toby begged off, claiming a stomachache that David was too preoccupied to question thoroughly. Are you sure you'll be all right here alone? Angela asked, her concern genuine despite the complicated dynamics between them. Grandma's coming over, Toby said, which was true. Mama Ruth had called earlier to say she'd stop by. So David and Angela went to the beach, and for a few hours, they remembered what had drawn them together in the first place. They walked along the shore, talking about small things that didn't carry the weight of grief or the pressure of blending families. For those precious hours, they were just a man and a woman trying to find their way toward happiness. Meanwhile, Toby sat in the living room with his grandmother, but he wasn't resting. He was working on something important, something that had been forming in his mind for weeks. He'd learned to use his father's tablet for schoolwork, which meant he knew how to use its recording features too. Grandma, he said quietly, I need to show you something. He pulled up the audio file he'd recorded 2 nights before, when he'd been unable to sleep and had heard voices in the garden below his window. Mama Ruth listened, her face growing graver with each passing second. Angela's voice came through clearly. We can't keep doing this, Kel. It's not fair to anyone. Then Kel's voice, smooth and persuasive. What's not fair is you pretending you don't feel what we both know you feel. David is a good man, but he's not present. He's still married to a memory. That's not true. He's trying. Is he? Or is he just going through the motions, using you as a life raft while he drowns in grief? There was a long pause, then Angela's voice again, smaller now. I don't know what to do. I care about David. I care about Toby. But you make me feel seen, valued, alive, all of those things. And it's wrong. It's so wrong. Feelings aren't right or wrong, Angela. They just are. The recording continued for another minute before Toby had turned it off, too scared to hear more. Mama Ruth sat in silence for a long moment after it ended, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh, child," she finally whispered. "Oh, my dear child. Dad needs to hear it," Toby said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "He needs to know the truth." "Yes," Mama Ruth agreed, her heart breaking for all of them. "Yes, he does." When David and Angela returned from the beach, they were laughing, something rare enough that it should have been cause for celebration. But Mama Ruth's face when she opened the door stopped David's smile cold. "We need to talk," she said. "Now." Angela sensed something was wrong immediately. "Is Toby all right?" "Toby is fine. Better than fine, actually. He's upstairs, being braver than any of us." Mama Ruth looked at her son. "David, there's something you need to hear." In the living room, with the evening sun casting long shadows through the windows, David listened to the recording. He listened to it twice, actually, because the first time through, his brain refused to process what his ears were telling him. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Angela stood frozen, all the color drained from her face. "David, I can explain." "Explain what?" His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "Explain how long you've been lying to me? Explain how my best friend has been betraying me under my own roof? Explain how I've been such a fool. It's not what you think. Nothing physical has happened between us." "Oh, well then, that makes it all fine, doesn't it?" The anger was building now, filling the hollow places where trust used to live. "You've only been emotionally cheating with my best friend. That's so much better. David, please." "How long?" he demanded. "How long have you two been doing this?" Angela's shoulders slumped in defeat. "It started about 2 months ago. Just talking at first. He was here to help fix the cabinet, and we just started talking. And he listened to me, David. He saw me. Do you understand? He made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't just a poor replacement for the perfect woman who came before me. So this is my fault?" David's voice cracked. "I didn't pay enough attention to you. So you turned to my best friend?" "No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I was lonely. I was trying so hard to fit into this family, to be what you and Toby needed, and I was drowning. Kel threw me a line, and I grabbed it. It was wrong. I know it was wrong. But I'm not some villain here, David. I'm human. I'm flawed. And I made a terrible mistake." Before David could respond, the doorbell rang. Mama Ruth went to answer it, and moments later, Kel walked into the room. His easy smile faded when he saw everyone's faces. "What's going on?" he asked, though David could see the moment Kel realized they knew. The way his posture changed, the careful blankness that came over his features. "You need to leave," David said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You need to leave my house and never come back." "David, man, let me explain." "Explain." David stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "Explain how you looked me in the eye every day while pursuing my girlfriend? Explain how you sat with me at Miriam's grave and talked about brotherhood and loyalty? Explain how you took advantage of someone vulnerable because you could." Kel had the decency to look ashamed, but he didn't back down. "I didn't plan this, David. It just happened. Sometimes feelings just happen." "No." David stepped closer, and Mama Ruth moved to position herself between them. "No. Feelings don't just happen with your best friend's partner. That's a choice. A series of choices. And you made every single one of them knowing exactly what you were doing." "Maybe I did. But can you honestly say you've been present in this relationship? Can you honestly say you've given Angela what she needs? Or have you been using her as a Band-Aid for a wound that won't heal?" The words hit David like physical blows because there was truth in them, bitter and hard as it was to swallow. He had been going through the motions. He had been using Angela as a bridge between grief and some theoretical future where the pain wasn't so overwhelming. But that didn't excuse what they'd done. "Get out," David said quietly. "Get out of my house. Out of my life. We're done." "David," I said, "get out." David's voice rose to a shout that brought Toby running down the stairs. The boy stood on the landing, his eyes wide, watching as the man who'd been like an uncle to him was thrown out of their lives. Watching as Angela stood crying in the middle of the living room. Watching as his father's face crumbled with pain that matched what Toby had carried for 2 years. After Kel left, after the shouting stopped echoing through the house, Angela turned to David one more time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. You both did. I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life." She looked up at Toby, still standing on the stairs. "I'm sorry to you too, Toby. I'm sorry I tried to erase your mother. I'm sorry I wasn't what you needed. I'm sorry for all of it." Toby didn't respond. He just watched as Angela gathered her things, as she packed up the life she tried to build in this house. She moved through the rooms, collecting her belongings, leaving behind the changes she'd made that had never quite felt like home anyway. At the door, she turned back one last time. "David, if you ever need anything." "Goodbye, Angela." She nodded, understanding the finality in his voice, and left. The door closing behind her sounded like punctuation at the end of a difficult chapter. In the silence that followed, Mama Ruth made tea while David sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Toby came down the stairs slowly and climbed into his father's lap, something he hadn't done in months. "I'm sorry, Dad," the boy whispered. "I'm sorry you're hurt." David held his son close, breathing in the smell of his shampoo, feeling the weight of him that seemed to grow heavier every day. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Toby. Nothing. You were the only one brave enough to tell the truth. You were the only one who saw what needed to be seen. Are we going to be okay?" David wanted to say yes immediately, to reassure his son that everything would be fine. But he learned something these past few hours about the cost of convenient lies. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but we're going to try. We're going to figure it out together." That night, David couldn't sleep. He wandered through the house, really seeing it for the first time in months. Angela had left quickly, but her influence remained everywhere. The beige walls, the modern furniture, the sterile organization that had replaced Miriam's warm chaos. He went to the garage and found Miriam's old rocking chair, the one Angela had banished months ago. It was dusty, with a loose spindle that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. David carried it back into the living room, positioning it by the window where it had always sat before. In the morning, Toby found his father standing in the living room, surrounded by boxes. Not moving out boxes, but moving back boxes. The yellow curtains were hanging in the windows again. The accent wall that Miriam had painted in shades of ocean blue was uncovered, the beige paint peeled away. Miriam's flower pots lined the windowsills, rescued from wherever Angela had stored them. "Dad," Toby's voice was uncertain. David turned, and for the first time in what felt like years, his smile reached his eyes. "Help me," he asked. Together, father and son spent the day not erasing Angela's presence, but balancing it. They kept some of the changes she'd made, the ones that had improved the house without trying to overwrite its history. But they brought Miriam back too, not as a shrine, but as an honored part of their story. They created what David called a memory corner in the living room. It held photos of Miriam, carefully selected by Toby. It held some of her favorite books, her collection of seashells from beaches they'd visited as a family. And it held Toby's drawings, the ones that showed their family whole and the ones that showed it learning to be whole again. "We don't forget people we love," David told his son as they arranged the space. "We don't pretend they never existed. We carry them with us, and we keep living." Both things can be true at the same time. The weeks that followed weren't easy. David started therapy, something he should have done years ago. He took Toby with him sometimes, and sometimes the boy went alone. They talked about grief and guilt and the difference between moving forward and moving on. David cut back his hours at work, actually left the office when he said he would. He had dinner with Toby every night, really present for the first time since Miriam died. They cooked together, trying to remember her recipes, and making peace with the fact that their versions were never quite the same. They didn't need to be the same. They needed to be theirs. One evening, about a month after Angela left, Toby brought a new drawing to show his father. It depicted 3 figures under a starry sky. A man and a boy stood on solid ground, holding hands. Above them, smiling down with gentle benediction, was a woman with Miriam's face. "This is us now," Toby explained. "Mama's not fading anymore. She's just in a different place. But she can still see us. She can still love us. And we can still love her while we keep living." David felt tears stream down his face, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind of tears that came from release, from healing, from finally understanding what his son had been trying to tell him all along. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, pulling Toby into a hug. "I learned from Mama," Toby said simply. "She always said the truth might hurt, but lies hurt worse." David thought about Angela and Kel, about how their lies had indeed hurt worse than truth ever could. He thought about his own lies, too, the ones he'd told himself about being ready for a new relationship when he was still drowning in grief. The lies about Toby being fine when the boy was clearly not fine. The lies about being present when he was still lost in the past. "Your mama was a smart woman," David said. "The smartest I ever knew." Life didn't magically become perfect after that. There were still hard days when grief ambushed David at unexpected moments. There were still times when Toby grew quiet and withdrawn, missing his mother with an intensity that made his chest hurt. But they had each other, and they had honesty, and they had the courage to keep trying. They visited Miriam's grave together every Sunday, bringing fresh lilies and telling her about their week. David talked to her about his struggles, about his mistakes, about the slow and painful process of learning to live fully again. Toby brought his drawings, leaving them at the headstone like offerings. The house became a home again, not despite Miriam's memory, but because of it. Her photos smiled from the walls. Her favorite music played in the kitchen while they cooked. Her presence was woven into the fabric of their daily lives, not as a ghost that haunted them, but as a foundation that supported them. Mama Ruth visited often, her wise eyes taking in the changes with quiet approval. "You're doing good, son," she told David one evening as they sat on the porch while Toby played in the yard. "You're honoring the past while building the future. That's all anyone can do." "It's harder than I thought it would be," David admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm finally healing, and other days the grief is as fresh as it was 2 years ago." "That's how it works," she said gently. "Grief isn't linear. It's not something you conquer and move past. It's something you carry with you. And some days it's heavier than others. But you're not trying to put it down anymore. You're learning to carry it with grace." "Angela called last week," David said quietly. "She wanted to know how we were doing." "What did you tell her?" "That we're figuring it out. That I hope she's okay, but that I need space. Time." He paused. "She's not a bad person, Mama. She just made bad choices. We all did." "That's very mature of you." "I don't feel mature. I feel like I'm stumbling around in the dark most days, hoping I don't break anything else." Mama Ruth patted his hand. "That's called being human, child. None of us have all the answers. We just do our best and hope it's enough." As the months passed, David found himself thinking less about Angela and Kel. The betrayal still stung when he let himself dwell on it, but he chose not to dwell. He chose instead to focus on what he had, not what he'd lost. He chose to be present for his son, to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of truth and trust. Toby bloomed in ways David hadn't expected. The boy's drawings became more hopeful, filled with color and light instead of shadows and sorrow. He talked more, laughed more, engaged with the world in ways he hadn't since his mother died. He made new friends at school and brought them home to play, filling the house with the kind of joyful chaos that had been missing for too long. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the confrontation that had shattered and ultimately saved their family, David found Toby in the memory corner, carefully dusting Miriam's photographs. "You know something, Dad?" the boy said without looking up. "I don't think Angela was trying to be mean. I think she was just scared." The insight surprised David. Scared of what? Of not being enough. Of not being Mama. Toby turned to face his father. "I was scared of that too. Scared that if I let myself like her, it would mean I didn't love Mama anymore. But that's not how love works, is it?" "No," David agreed, sitting down beside his son. "Love isn't a limited resource. Loving someone new doesn't diminish the love we have for someone we lost. I know that now. I wish I'd known it then." Toby was quiet for a moment. Do you think Angela knows that? I hope so, David said honestly. I hope she's learning what we're learning. That it's okay to move forward without forgetting. That memory and new beginning can exist together. Maybe someday we could tell her that. Not now, but someday, when we're all more healed. David looked at his 8-year-old son and marveled at the capacity for forgiveness in a child's heart. Maybe someday, he agreed. For now, we focus on us, on being honest with each other, on building a life that honors Mama while still letting us grow. I like that, Toby said, leaning against his father. I like us this way. Not perfect, but real. Not perfect, but real, David repeated. I'll take that any day. That evening, as the sun set over Lagos, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, David and Toby sat on the porch watching the world go by. The house behind them held both memory and possibility. The air smelled of rain and Miriam's favorite flowers that Toby had planted in the garden. Somewhere in the distance, music played, and children laughed, and life continued its relentless forward march. David thought about the journey they'd been on, the pain they'd endured, the lessons they'd learned. He thought about Angela and Kel, and he found that he could hope for their healing without needing to be part of it. He thought about Miriam and felt gratitude instead of grief, at least in that moment. Dad, Toby's voice broke into his thoughts. Are we going to be okay? David remembered asking himself that question so many times over the past 2 years. He remembered the nights he'd been certain the answer was no, that they'd never recover from the loss of Miriam. He remembered the pain of Angela's betrayal, the shattering of trust with Kel, the feeling that his family was fracturing beyond repair. But sitting there with his son, in a house that had finally become a home again, with the memory of his wife honored instead of hidden, David discovered he knew the answer. Yeah, Toby, we're going to be okay. Not because we've forgotten the pain or pretended it never happened, but because we're facing it together. Because we're choosing truth over comfort, presence over pretense. Because we're learning that being whole doesn't mean being unbroken. It means acknowledging the breaks and choosing to keep going anyway. Toby nodded, satisfied with this answer in a way he wouldn't have been months ago. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, neither of them feeling the need to fill the quiet with words. Inside the house, candles flickered in the memory corner, casting dancing shadows on photographs of a woman who would never be forgotten. Her smile seemed to shine brighter in the candlelight, as if she approved of what her husband and son had finally learned. Love wasn't about replacing or forgetting. It wasn't about moving on or leaving behind. It was about carrying forward, about honoring what was while embracing what could be. It was about truth, even when truth was painful. Especially when truth was painful. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, David felt something shift inside him. Not healing, exactly, because healing wasn't a destination you reached, but maybe the beginning of healing. Maybe the courage to believe that broken things could be made beautiful again, not by hiding the cracks, but by filling them with something stronger than what was there before. Thank you, he whispered to the night, to his son, to the memory of his wife, to whatever force in the universe had given him the strength to keep trying. For what? Toby asked. For teaching me how to see again. For being brave enough to show me the truth when I was too scared to look for it myself. For reminding me that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, being honest, and choosing each other even when it's hard. Toby smiled, the kind of smile that carried hope and healing in equal measure. That's what Mama would have wanted, he said. For us to be honest. For us to be together. For us to keep living. Yes, David agreed, pulling his son close. That's exactly what she would have wanted. The night deepened around them, but neither felt afraid of the darkness. They had learned that inside, the house smelled of tomatoes and peppers and onions, the familiar scent of Miriam's jollof rice that they'd attempted to recreate dozens of times. Sometimes it turned out well, sometimes it didn't, but the trying mattered more than the result. Dad, Toby called out when he heard the door. Come taste this. Tell me if it needs more spice. David dropped his briefcase and joined his family in the kitchen, tasting the rice from the spoon Toby offered. It was good. Not exactly like Miriam's, but good in its own right. its own creation born from memory, but standing on its own merit. It's perfect, David said, and he meant it. They ate dinner together at the table, not in front of the television or with phones in hand, but actually together. They talked about their days, about Toby's art project at school, about the community center David was designing, about Mama Ruth's church committee drama. They laughed and teased each other and existed in the kind of comfortable intimacy that only comes from radical honesty and consistent presence. After dinner, while Mama Ruth dozed on the couch and Toby worked on homework upstairs, David found himself standing in the memory corner again. He did this sometimes, not out of sadness, but out of connection, a way of checking in with Miriam, of keeping her part of their ongoing story. "We're doing okay," he told her photograph softly. "Toby's thriving. I'm learning. We're figuring out how to carry you with us while still moving forward. I hope that's what you wanted. I hope wherever you are, you're proud of us." He thought he could feel her approval in the warm evening breeze that came through the open window, carrying the scent of the flowers Toby had planted. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Either way, it brought him comfort. His phone buzzed with an email notification. David almost ignored it, but something made him check. It was from Angela. "David," the email began, "I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I don't expect a response, and I'm not trying to reinsert myself into your life. I just wanted you to know that I've been doing a lot of work on myself these past months. Therapy, reflection, taking responsibility for my choices. I realize now that I was using your grief as an excuse for my own behavior. I was threatened by Miriam's memory because I hadn't done the work to feel secure in myself. I betrayed your trust because I was too cowardly to be honest about my feelings and my needs. I'm sorry. I'll always be sorry. But more than that, I'm grateful. Grateful that you and Toby showed me what it looks like to face truth with courage. I hope you're both healing. I hope you're finding your way forward. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Both of you do. With love and regret, Angela." David read the email 3 times, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Anger that had dulled but not disappeared. Sadness for what might have been if everyone involved had been braver, more honest, more healed before trying to build something new. And yes, a small seed of forgiveness beginning to take root. He didn't respond immediately. He wasn't ready for that. Might not be ready for months or even years. But he saved the email instead of deleting it, and that felt like progress. Upstairs, he found Toby sprawled on his bed, surrounded by books and papers, working on what looked like an art project. The boy had his tongue between his teeth in concentration, a habit he'd inherited from Miriam. "What are you working on?" David asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Toby held up a drawing. It showed a tree with deep roots and spreading branches. In the roots were images of people and places, memories and moments. In the branches were new leaves, bright green and reaching toward the sun. "It's called Growing from the Past," Toby explained. "My teacher said we should create art about change and growth. I thought about us, about how we have these deep roots in our memories with Mama, but we're also growing new branches, new experiences and new days. The roots feed the branches, you know? They're connected." David felt tears prick his eyes for the 100th time that day. When had his son become so wise? When had this grief-stricken little boy transformed into someone who could articulate truths that many adults spent lifetimes trying to understand? "It's beautiful, Toby. Really beautiful. Do you think Mama would like it?" "I think Mama would love it. I think she'd be so proud of the young man you're becoming." Toby was quiet for a moment, adding color to one of the branches. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you think you'll ever want to date someone again? I mean, not now, but someday." The question caught David off guard. "I don't know, son. Why do you ask?" "Because I want you to be happy, and I think Mama would want that too. But I also want to make sure that next time, we do it differently. We don't hide things or pretend. We talk about stuff, even when it's hard. We make sure everyone feels safe to be honest." "When did you get so smart?" Toby grinned. "I've always been smart. You just started listening." David laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuineness. "You're right. I did. And yes, maybe someday I'll be ready to open my heart again. But right now, I'm exactly where I need to be. Right here with you. learning how to be the father you deserve. You're already that father, Toby said simply. You just had to remember. Later that night, after Toby had gone to bed and Mama Ruth had been driven home, David sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. He thought about the journey they'd been on, the distance they'd traveled from that rainy night when he'd found Toby digging through trash for his mother's photograph. They'd been broken then, fractured by grief and poor choices and an inability to communicate truth. But they weren't broken anymore. They were healing. Slowly, imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. He thought about Angela and Kel, and he found that he could wish them well without bitterness. Their betrayal had hurt him deeply, had shattered trust he thought was unbreakable. But it had also forced him to wake up, to see what he'd been missing, to finally begin the real work of healing. In a strange way, their betrayal had been a gift. A painful, devastating gift, but a gift nonetheless. It had shown him that he couldn't build a future on an unhealed past. It had brought him and Toby closer together. It had taught them both about the power of truth and the cost of lies. David's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. David, it's Kel. I know I have no right to reach out, but I need you to know I'm sorry. Not just for what happened with Angela, but for taking advantage of your trust, your grief, your vulnerability. You deserve better from me. You deserve better from both of us. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what I did, and I'm living with that every day. I hope you and Toby are doing well. You were always the better man. I just wish I'd been wise enough to learn from that instead of betraying it. I'm sorry, brother. I'm so sorry. David stared at the message for a long time. Part of him wanted to delete it, to block the number, to maintain the wall he'd built around the wound Kel had inflicted. But another part of him, the part that Toby had helped him rediscover, recognized that Kel's remorse was genuine. That didn't mean David had to forgive him or let him back into their lives. But it meant he could acknowledge the apology without letting it own him. He typed a simple response. I appreciate the apology. I'm not ready for more than that. But I hope you're working on being the person you want to be. We're doing the same. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement. It was the opening of a door, even if neither of them walked through it. It was the kind of grace that Miriam would have shown, the kind of wisdom that Toby was teaching him through example. The weeks turned into months, and the months began to build toward a year since the night of revelation and reckoning. David and Toby fell into new rhythms, new routines that honored the past while embracing the present. They visited Miriam's grave regularly, but the visits became less about pain and more about connection. They talked to her about their lives, their challenges, their small victories. Toby's art continued to evolve, his drawings showing a remarkable maturity for his age. His teacher recommended him for a young artist showcase at a local gallery, and David watched with pride as his son's work was displayed alongside pieces by much older children. The drawing that hung in the center of Toby's collection was titled The House That Remembers. It showed their home with transparent walls, revealing all the layers of life within. Some layers showed Miriam cooking in the kitchen, reading to a young Toby, laughing with David. Other layers showed the present. David and Toby cooking together, Mama Ruth visiting, empty spaces that represented possibility rather than absence. People stopped in front of that drawing for long minutes, struck by its emotional depth and honesty. More than one viewer was seen wiping tears from their eyes. At the gallery opening, a woman approached David. She was in her 40s with kind eyes and a sad smile. Your son is incredibly talented, she said. That drawing, The House That Remembers, it resonated with me deeply. I lost my husband 3 years ago, and I've been struggling with whether to keep his things, whether to move, whether holding on means I'm not healing. But looking at that drawing, I realized I've been asking the wrong question. It's not about holding on or letting go. It's about integration, about letting the past be part of the present without letting it define the future. David felt his heart swell with pride for his son. He's taught me the same lessons, he admitted. Sometimes children see things more clearly than we do. Sometimes they do, the woman agreed. You've raised a wise young man. After she walked away, David found Toby standing in front of his own artwork, studying it with a critical eye. "What do you think?" David asked. "Are you proud of it?" "I think it's honest," Toby said. "That's why I'm proud of stuff. It doesn't pretend things are perfect or easy. It just shows them as they are. Real and complicated and beautiful anyway. Just like life," David said. "Just like life," Toby agreed. That night, back at home, they celebrated with ice cream and the kind of comfortable conversation that had become their new normal. Mama Ruth called to congratulate Toby on his successful showing, and her voice carried the kind of pride that only grandmothers can convey. "You know," she said before hanging up, "Miriam would have been bursting with pride today. Both of you. You've honored her memory by living fully, by being honest, by choosing courage over comfort. That's the greatest tribute you could ever give." After the call ended, David and Toby sat together on the couch, not watching television or looking at screens, just being present with each other. The memory corner glowed softly with candlelight. Miriam's photographs smiling at them across the space that was no longer a divide but a bridge. "Dad," Toby said quietly, "I'm not sad anymore. I mean, I still miss Mama. I'll always miss her. But I'm not sad. Is that okay?" David pulled his son closer. "That's more than okay. That's exactly what healing looks like. Missing someone doesn't have to mean being consumed by sadness. It can mean carrying them with love and gratitude while still living your life fully. I think that's what she'd want. I know it is." They sat in comfortable silence, both of them feeling the weight of how far they'd come. From that rainy night of desperation and hidden photographs to this moment of peace and honest connection. The journey had been brutal, marked by betrayal and painful revelations and the kind of hard truths that force you to rebuild yourself from the foundation up. But they'd made it, not because the path was easy, but because they'd chosen to walk it together. Because they'd chosen truth over comfort, presence over avoidance, and love over fear. As the night deepened and Toby's eyes grew heavy, David carried his son upstairs, something he hadn't done in years. Toby was getting too big for it, really, but tonight it felt right. In that moment, David understood that parenthood wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, being honest, and loving fiercely even when everything in you wanted to run and hide. He tucked Toby into bed, making sure the nightlight was on, placing a glass of water on the nightstand. All the small rituals of care that he'd sometimes rushed through before but now savored. "Dad," Toby's sleepy voice stopped him at the door. "Yeah, son?" "Thank you for listening to my drawings. Thank you for seeing what I was trying to tell you." David's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you for being brave enough to show me. Thank you for not giving up on us." "Never," Toby murmured, already half asleep. "We're a team." "Yeah," David whispered. "We're a team." Downstairs, David stood once more in front of the memory corner. He looked at Miriam's photographs, at Toby's drawings, at the artifacts of a life that continued to matter even though she was gone. "We did it," he told her softly. "We found our way through. It wasn't the path I thought we'd take, and God knows it hurt more than I thought I could survive. But we made it, and I think we're going to be okay. More than okay. I think we're going to be happy again in a new way. A way that includes you, but isn't trapped by you. A way that honors what we had while embracing what we're building." The candles flickered as if in response, and David chose to believe it was her approval. Her blessing on the life they were creating, the healing they were choosing, the truth they were finally living. He blew out the candles and headed upstairs, ready for sleep, ready for tomorrow, ready for whatever came next. Because he'd learned the most important lesson grief had to teach. That love doesn't end with death, that memory and forward motion can coexist, and that sometimes the most broken things become the most beautiful when you have the courage to rebuild them honestly. In his room, David looked out the window at the Lagos night, at the stars scattered across the darkness like promises. Somewhere out there, Angela and Kel were living their own journeys toward redemption and healing. Somewhere out there, countless other families were navigating grief and loss and the complicated work of moving forward. And somewhere beyond sight and knowing, he chose to believe that Miriam watched over them all with love and understanding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new choices. But tonight, David Okoro could sleep peacefully, knowing that he and his son were finally living in truth. They weren't perfect. They weren't without pain. But they were present, they were honest, and they were together. And sometimes that was more than enough. Sometimes that was everything. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that healing is possible even after devastating betrayal, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below and share your own stories of redemption and resilience. Because we all carry pain, we all face betrayals, and we all deserve to know that we can rebuild ourselves into something beautiful and true. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, honesty, and the courage to keep showing up, even when everything in you wants to hide. Until next time, choose truth. Choose healing. Choose life.